Dude, nobody thinks about dying. I mean, even when we had our conversation and you showed me on an iPhone how you can have a legacy and how that overpowers an estate plan, I was shocked. And I'm 30 years old, and I didn't really think that was a thing. If you're 60 years old today and you're writing an estate plan, you should know that within 5 or 10 years, you might own a lot of crypto and you have no idea that that's even a possibility. People are going to start owning digital assets they had no idea they would ever encounter in very short amount of time. Learn about digital assets. Everything is going to be digitalized, whether you want it to be or not.
Welcome to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. If you ever asked, how do I protect myself and those I love if something unexpected happened to me? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Niki Weiss, and together we'll explore how to protect yourself in a world where both your physical and digital legacy leave a lasting impact. And welcome back to another episode of the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. My very special guest today is Franco Della Torre. Franco, you and I met at Consensus in Miami.
That's correct.
And this is back just in spring, just a few weeks ago in May of 2026. And when we met and I introduced myself as a death tech specialist, something caught your ear, and then we scheduled another call, and here we are today. So please share with our guests, how does Web3 and death tech have a combination?
Absolutely. I think we had some very interesting conversations, and I'm glad to be here. So thank you for having me. You know, as somebody who works in the legal space, I'm very intrigued by what you do. I think a lot of people don't think about what would happen to their digital assets in particular, which are more and more important as days go by, especially with the passing of the Clarity Act, if that were to happen soon.
And we might need to take a pause and talk about the Clarity Act,
Absolutely.
because maybe many of our listeners don't know, but you're an attorney currently licensed in Florida, but because our digital footprint is so broad, you mentioned that you're going to be looking to gain your license in other states. And is that just because of the adoption of what's happening with the Clarity Act and just people needing services?
Absolutely. So I'm an attorney based in Florida, but work a lot with businesses and startups, a lot of which are, you know, for many good reasons that we can discuss, incorporating in Delaware. I'm looking to get licensed in Texas. I think that might be the next hub spot for business, especially because Delaware has high franchise fees, lots of different issues in Delaware that makes it one of the most expensive places to litigate issues in the nation. And not to mention, you know, the fact that people need to have estate plans, you know, throughout the United States. So sometimes that can get really complicated when you're working with Delaware in particular. So Texas is going to be a very interesting jurisdiction in the future. Delaware continues to be the dominating one. Florida is great. We could all talk very well about Florida. You know, low tax rates. I think the entire nation seems to be moving here per day. I've seen the stats. Really interesting what's happening in Florida. And right, yeah, just very interested in your work because it goes hand in hand with what I do with clients all the time. And I'm happy here to be talking about it. We can get into some specifics.
And when we talk about your clients, we're talking about people who are starting up businesses. Now, not necessarily in the Web3 or digital space, but that's kind of that's where we met, right? We really met at a blockchain conference, Consensus, which is one of the largest US conferences for blockchain. But also things are percolating. I mean, we're talking data centers. You know, what are they putting in the data centers? I don't know if you heard when we were at Consensus in Miami, they said that blockchain walked so AI could run. And now it feels like blockchain is sprinting with all of these data centers. And how is that impacting your business? What do you see happening in this space?
That's a great point. I've been in this space for what feels like an eternity, but you know, let's say 6 years. And back in the day, let's say in 2017, I think we're all familiar. At that time, there was a lot of ICOs and crypto fraud, and I was actually the opposite side of the spectrum. I was working with a class action firm, and I was seeking out crypto fraud to do class action lawsuits and try to recover funds that, you know, many people have lost in the community. That's changed completely, and I think now we're sprinting into what lots of people in this community have been dreaming in the world of digital assets, of course, for the last 15 years, and some clarity, hence the Clarity Act, in terms of how digital assets are going to be regulated. And so, absolutely, I think we're sprinting into the opportunities we've been having with blockchain for a very long time. and it's finally going to become clear what we can do and how businesses can utilize it. For example, real estate tokenization, I think is a very interesting concept. Something that my clients have worked with at Consensus. We had a prop tech event when I met a really interesting group of individuals who also are working in the tokenization space. Blockchain is great for real estate. It's great even and it has many implications. And I have to agree with you. I mean, we're at a point where finally we're seeing, the uses for it and how we can, do it in a legal way. Before everything was sort of illegal. Let's go with that. And now we're finally getting some clarity.
Or unstructured. We'll just call it unstructured, unsupervised, no oversight.
Right.
But now that businesses are becoming more legitimate and these transactions are becoming more legitimate, it's amazing how we're using people are sprinting in without a backup plan, right? So they're making spending big money. I can't tell you how many people I spoke to. I don't know how much they had in the wallet, but when I asked them, hey, if you died tomorrow, how much mayhem would there be for your digital afterlife or your current digital life? And a lot of them, there was like a deer in the headlights. It was amazing how exciting this digital space is and how little planning people are starting or willing to think about if they're not around or they're incapacitated. Do you have any stories or scenarios where you've had a client or a situation that because they didn't plan turned out chaos,
I
confusion?
absolutely do. And I have to say, I congratulate you for guiding me with your questions because I think that brings me to two great points. And speaking of plans, I love the fact that we're both wearing white. That was unplanned. I think that was a great coordination on our behalf. That was unplanned. But I am basically the planning attorney, right? When it comes to businesses, I try to tell clients all the time, and sometimes because they're in a disruptive space, they don't think about these things carefully. Compliance and regulations, which we're going to get some more information with the Clarity Act, whether a token is a security and it should be regulated by the SEC, or if the business that's working with money transmitters needs to work with the CFTC, right? Before both of these agencies were kind of fighting each other, and basically anybody who created a business in the space was getting sued by the SEC, whether it was for ICOs back in the day, prop tech now, or just any sort of token where basically everything passed the Howey test, meaning that somebody had a managerial efforts making an investment be considered something that was going to go up in price, right? So the SEC was basically saying anybody working in the space was violating securities laws for not focusing on compliance. But maybe I jumped the gun here because more importantly, and something I'm seeing day to day, is that a lot of people who are incorporating their companies, first of all, they're not incorporating, which is probably the most important thing you should be doing, right, for limited liability purposes. But if they are incorporating, they're using some new softwares powered by AI and other things that are making things more cheap in the legal space. And I think they're great. An example of it is Clerky or Stripe by Atlas. And they will go and generate, the documents that attorneys were charging at around $7,000 to $10,000 to help create a Delaware C corp, for example. The big issue I'm seeing with clients there is that a lot of them don't have shareholders agreements, and that's the crux of where we could resolve these issues before they happen. That is the plan: a shareholder agreement for a corporation or an operating agreement for an LLC. In those agreements, we'll have buy-sell agreements. So, for example, if someone were to die or get divorced or be incapacitated, we have a plan for what would happen to that members in an LLC's shares or somebody who's a shareholder of a corporation or director. It doesn't stop the business immediately because we have, as attorneys, we're preparing these agreements where we plan for these things. And then after that, of course, we also need to know what's going to happen to their assets, especially the digital ones, and who takes them, right? Because basically everything's governed both in the business world is regulated by state law, and also an inheritance is also governed by state law, unless you plan for it and contract out of it, whether it's with a will or a trust. And so both in the business world with shareholders agreements and for planning your assets with preferably a trust, better than a will. You need to plan for these things and make sure that you know who's going to get what. And I think we have an especially big problem in the world of digital assets. And I actually wrote an article on this recently, where we have private and public keys. And if you don't give access to your private keys, then a court can't go and go into your crypto wallet, right? So they need to have access to this information, and it goes above and beyond just the preparation of legal documents. So that way, somebody passes away and has maybe $5 million in a crypto wallet, but nobody can access it. It's either lost forever, or you put access to those private keys in your estate planning document and you hide it,
Right.
just to make sure that if you were to die, the right assets go to the right people, not just according to your wishes, but you need to effectuate it properly, of course.
So let me ask you, because I mean, our audience is going to be a mixed audience here. Some people might have a level of Web3 blockchain crypto fluency, and some of the terms that you've been talking about might be very familiar to them. And we probably have people on the other end that they're joining us, and they might this whole crypto conversation is very a foreign language to them. But I feel like this is where we're heading, folks. Like this is the reality between AI, the data centers, quantum computing. Like we are looking at a digital world, and we need to become more proficient in a way that protects us. So when we talk about, let's just like take cryptocurrency for example. Let me take before we talk about cryptocurrency, because you were talking about your businesses. How do you start these difficult conversations? Like someone comes to you and says, "All right, I have this brilliant idea for a unicorn that's going to bring hundredfold $1 billion business, $100 billion business." When you go through that business checklist, onboarding checklist, do you talk about death and dying, like disillusion, divorce? Is that part of your checklist? And how do you bring up that conversation to somebody?
It's a great question. And I think that's why I've been so interested in your work, because, having that conversation with clients as an attorney, it tends to be a very difficult one. First and foremost, in my profession, a lot of attorneys charge by the hour and they have very high prices. So just having a conversation with your attorney at all is already difficult. It's sort of like pulling teeth. I tend to have conversations with clients, free consultations. And so those are the first things I bring up when you're going to start a business. I always give the example of an evil cousin. If you were to die, right, and you don't have a plan, maybe your evil brother or sister or cousin, because I think that would be a more hypothetical situation that we can understand could happen.
Oh, listen, I've heard stories. You don't have to go too far down the family tree.
There you go. Right. But, I think most people try to be optimistic and don't think that, close to
Okay.
the family tree, they would have issues, but it happens as well. And so I like to use the example of an evil cousin because I say, look, if you don't plan for this, state law says that, everything will go to your wife, who maybe does nothing about your business, or your son or daughter, who also knows nothing about your business, or a partner who has bad intentions for the business. And you'll find that out very quickly when you see that you don't have the right amount of shares to be voting on the decisions of the business. But imagine if you were to die, then everything kind of goes out, it goes beyond your control. So the reason I start with those conversations is because I say, like, look, the most important thing when you're starting a business is making sure you understand the mechanics and the controlling of how that business is going to be run, right? Because if you don't have 51%, you're kind of always going to be dependent on other people's votes and decision making. And that goes for a lot of things in the business. Sometimes you actually need 75 maybe to sell all the assets of the company. There's scenarios where you need a certain amount of votes just to let other people join the company, or whether you want to have these things called tag along and drag along rights, just to make sure that you can force other people who require the votes in order to make decisions of whether you're going to sell the company. A tag along is if I decided to sell my 51% of shares and you're a 10% shareholder, you're able to tag along in that sale at the same price that I'm being offered the purchase. The drag along would mean that I'm forcing you to sell your shares because somebody wants to buy my company for $3 million and only at that price point, and we need to force everyone to sell because nobody wants to buy 60% of the company, they want the full 100. And right, we're talking about privately, held businesses, not like a public corporation. So that's why those things are important in the startup world. And lots of people who are entering the Web3, crypto and AI communities are starting to see and be familiar with these sorts of clauses, all things that are in shareholders agreements that usually you need to speak to attorneys. I get, and I think this has happened to many attorneys out in the world right now. We get a bunch of memos written up by AI. AI is great. It's a tool though. And sometimes AI, I've seen it myself, does not give you the best information. And so you can't really depend on that. And in fact, most of the information you discuss with AI, more in the litigation world, is discoverable. So you have no confidentiality with your clients. That's something important for people to know. So AI again is a tool, but you're still going to need to be able to have these conversations with people who are working in this space and understand what's going to happen, how you can pre-plan for anything that can happen for your business, and then as we were saying earlier, for your estate. But to answer your question, sorry, I talked a lot and didn't answer. I wanted to mention that the first conversation I have with clients is you need to think what's going to happen if you die, and that's why I'm so interested in your work because I have this client conversation with clients all the time. If you die, what happens?
And do they sidestep it? Or they're like, "Oh, we don't need to talk about that," or, "I'm 30 years old. Why should I have that conversation?" I mean, do they push back
Of
on you
course
on
they
that?
do. Nobody thinks about dying. I mean, even when we had our conversation,
I know.
yeah, even when we had our conversation and you showed me on an iPhone how you can have a legacy and how that overpowers an estate plan, I was shocked. And I'm 30 years old and 31 actually now. And I didn't really think that was the thing. And when I sent it to a family member, who's my father, he's like, this is something I should be
Right.
doing, not you. And I'm like, no, to be honest, this is something we should both be doing, and like, it's an unfortunate reality of life. I think you said it yourself. It's something that it's the most human thing that occurs. And so, of course, I tend to put it together with other scenarios, things that need to be planned for. It is not just dying. It could be a bankruptcy, right? If somebody goes bankrupt, then it kind of goes into their bankrupt estate, and then the trustee in that bankruptcy has to deal with the assets, including
To
a
manage it.
business. That's
Ugh.
when they die financially, right? But no one thinks they're going to die physically, and no one thinks they're going to die financially. So, of course, it's difficult.
Or
Or a
divorce.
divorce,
Divorce is also another death. Like,
right?
you talk about the evil cousin, how about the evil spouse,
Hmm.
right? That comes along and that how disruptive that is to the business. I mean, some businesses, they might have a solid business plan, but if they, who the players are in their family situation, people don't know, people have a pause and they don't know how to navigate it because they didn't have the conversations. So it sounds like you're kind of unusual. Maybe as an attorney, most attorneys, business attorneys, do they really, they're so excited about the operation agreement, but do they really think about the risks that are involved if there's death, dying, incapacitation, divorce, dissolution? I think there's one other one that I think the 4Ds, I think, is what a lot of the attorneys think of. The other piece that, as an attorney, that you need to be thinking about is, how is that transfer made? um, and a digital transfer is saying, like, let's say cryptocurrency. People are buying cryptocurrency and not really understanding how it navigates, how, what does it mean to have cryptocurrency as an asset, because it's not like your brokerage representative where you just, call a Vanguard and say, okay, there was a passing, and that you're named as a beneficiary. Currently today, you don't necessarily can name a beneficiary on a cold wallet, can you?
You can, you definitely can. But as I was saying
Okay.
before, it's important, especially in a cold wallet, it's important that you leave access to your private keys. Because a court, even if they have an estate plan saying that, your crypto, your Bitcoin, Ethereum, or any other crypto you're holding is going to go to your spouse or to your daughter or sibling, they can't effectuate that transfer, as you were asking before, unless they have access to your private keys, right? And so that's why I'm also having those conversations a lot with clients who are making estate plans. And whether they own crypto or not, I say, look, this is something you should include in your estate plan or in your trust because you may own. I mean, if you're 60 years old today and you're writing an estate plan, you should know that within 5 or 10 years, you might own a lot of crypto and you have no idea that that's even a possibility. I mean, there's ways now to have investments in crypto without you even being aware of it, right? In like a 401k.
Oh, you know what? That's a great
Right.
point. Is that all right, let's just take a pause here. When we were in Miami, I was blown away by the a number of representatives from institutions that were at this conference. I mean, there were 10,000 people at this conference, but all of them were there. PGW, Vanguard, BlackRock, like Merrill Lynch, I mean, all of the big players, and they had a huge team. So you just brought up a really good point, which is that you might have a traditional portfolio, and in that portfolio you have an FTE, and then within the FTE there's actually cryptocurrency that has been part of the portfolio, and you might not be aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I keep using the word crypto, but really it's digital assets because there's going to be so many things that are tokenized, and this is something I've been excited about for years, for the last 5 or maybe even 10 years. And I've been screaming it from the rooftops and saying like, look, and now we're really close to this being a reality, right? Like you may own real estate in that's tokenized. And
As
so
tokenized. So talk about, sorry, I'm
no
jumping in,
problem.
but talk about for those that aren't familiar with the tokenization of real world assets, maybe just do a 101 explanation.
Sure. A very simple way to put it is, you can crowdfund an investment in real estate that maybe is worth $1 million or $5 million, and you just tokenize you have a digital representation of what it means to have partial ownership to something, such as a piece of real estate. So in my mind, as an attorney that works in the business world, it's kind of similar to having shares of a company. And this goes again why the SEC probably thinks most tokens, unless you start calling them utility tokens, but it gets messy, are securities under the Howey test because you're you have a digital representation of something that is very normal to us in the real world, which is owning property. But that's the kind of stuff we need to be discussing now. Like if you have a piece of property in Florida, you can have a ladybird deed, and that effectively works as a trust. Uh,
Beneficiary.
I've
For people don't know, Lady Bird deed is legal. Was it 5 states? It's only a handful of states where you can a Lady Bird deed. And I did a podcast on Lady Bird deed. Sorry, educational moment here for those people that don't know. It's legal in only a few states where you can name a beneficiary while you're still alive, right? And so then that piece of property, if it's the beneficiary is named in the ladybird deed, it won't go through probate. Did I say it
You
correctly?
did say that correctly, and that's exactly what it does. And so, sometimes, and that's why I recommend many times to stay away from a will, for example. A will can get contested, and you'll still end up in probate. And probate is everybody's nightmare because it is a long court proceeding that can take months or years, and you
Years.
will see the worst well, I guess people who have died maybe don't have to worry about seeing it, but the worst will come out of
Those left
your
behind.
immediate, family, again, spouses, brothers. Sometimes people disclaim things in probate, maybe because, it could be a liability, more mortgage of sorts. But many times, especially, today when people are accumulating lots of wealth, thanks to AI or crypto or tokenized assets, there's likely to be a big fight. And probate is not pretty. And so a ladybird deed is probably something that's very recommendable to anyone who owns a piece of property in the state of Florida or those other 5 states where it's legal. And it's because it will immediately transfer the piece of real estate to the person who's named as beneficiary without having gone through the probate. It's the same reason why it's recommended to have trust and to avoid probate, essentially. But there's two things I want to talk about. One is digital assets, right? If you have tokenized versions of owning real estate, although it's a very simple comparison to owning actual real estate in fractions or in its totality, the courts and just legislation right now doesn't really treat it the same way. So you need to have plans in place for the transfer of tokenized assets and digital assets. And that's why I'm so interested in the work that you do. Because I think in the very near future, there's going to be plenty of people who had never imagined owning digital assets, but they're going to have most of their assets be digital, whether it's a crypto in their 401ks or having investments in real estate that's tokenized. That's something that's going to explode in the very soon, especially if the Clarity Act gets passed.
And it so I just for people to understand, it's not just property, right? I'm hearing the art world is starting to tokenize. And I had worked on a Web3 project for someone owning horses. Like you tokenized a horse, like you owned a piece of the horse, but you basically like it was a hashtag of owner showing ownership. And also as an attorney, I want people to get comfortable with this concept. Let's talk a little bit about smart contracts. So smart contracts, if again, let's do a one-on-one on what a smart contract is and how smart contracts in the estate world are starting to change the way people are documenting. Your actual will or trust is going to become a digital asset because of what I'm saying is a smart contract. And then I'll pass it off to you so you can do more of a professional description of what it is.
Well, absolutely. A contract, as we know, is technically an agreement between two parties. And usually, as I was saying before, it can help bypass some of the rules that are put in place by every state. For example, if you were to die today, then most of your assets without a contract, a trust, would go to the people named by state law, which is usually your siblings or your spouse. In Florida, we have the homestead, for example, and if you have a spouse or minor children, you actually can't plan in an estate plan to give the house to someone else other than your spouse, things of that sort. And so any contract is basically a way of making an agreement between two people. And in the world of business and estate planning, it tends to help to basically avoid the rules that are in place by state law. A smart contract is a digital form of that contract. It's one that's going to be executed through a program, right? So, like if I were to die, and a computer program, right? If I were to die and I had a smart contract trust, then basically, I guess a trust is a bad example because it's already kind of smart, even the ones that aren't smart. But the program is going to execute what that contract or trust says, right? And it doesn't, and it's going to be stored on the blockchain, and it's not going to require a court to come and intervene and say, this is what, Franco's wishes were, and these are the assets, and now we need to grab the private keys. A smart contract that actually worked great. Now, I love this conversation. It would work wonderfully in order to defeat the purpose of losing a private key, because you could have a computer program that could plan to share your private keys. And obviously there's a lot of cybersecurity and issues that go into this, and you want to be careful about this, but you could effectively, and this is so exciting to be alive today because there's so many people who are creating incredible things, and this is something that somebody could work on. They could have a smart contract that transfers private keys to the person of your choosing. So it's a fantastic topic. I love that you brought that up.
I mean, well, and also because I'm starting to see more and more legal services, legal tech companies that these smart contracts in estate planning is starting to percolate, just like they are also in the real estate. I would say real estate is probably leading the way in the legal services, deeds, probably because there's so much fraud with deeds and hacks that they're starting to digitize, tokenize the deeds. So there's traceability, interoperability, and trackability with all of the documentation out there, especially when you're looking across state lines. I know that becomes very complicated. And I would think that with estate planning would be the same thing, like to tokenize someone's will and or trust, into a smart contract, which means that there is a hashtag attached to that document. I mean, it's a program. And then it is stored on a designated blockchain, right? Again, we might be talking over some people's, might be new language, new nomenclature for some people, but I don't want to slow down our conversation because it's so meaningful. It's like, we're not that far away. I mean, I got into blockchain back in 2021 and just to wrap my head around, what was a smart contract. And now here we are in 2026. And it's like, this is like, you're probably, this is really happening, Franco. Like in our lifetime, in a very short period of time, we've gone from, going into Staples and getting a legal a piece of paper where you just fill it into a legit smart contract that is now can live forever on the blockchain.
Right, and I'm sure you define what a blockchain is all the time on your podcast. but for the listeners who maybe don't know, I like simplifying things a lot. So for me, tokens, again, digital versions of real world assets. What else? We talk about smart contracts, computer programs that are being executed by, sorry, contracts that are being executed by computer programming. The blockchain is a chain of blocks in what people call an immutable ledger. But what's so great about the blockchain is that it's distributed. It's like having a database that's distributed amongst many, many, many computers. And so what happens is that you can't really, it's immutable, meaning you can't really interfere with what the blockchain shows. There's a lot of transparency, and it defeats, a lot of the problems with trust in the digital world. So the blockchain and a smart contract can effectively help defeat fraud, as you were talking about, with deeds across state lines. And that's why it's very surprising to me that it's taken this long. It's probably the best technology we have for so many years. But
But the user experience is rough. I mean,
right.
the UX UI, it's still rough. There's still, and that's why I think blockchain had to walk so AI could run. But now that I think AI is going to start figuring, and for people that don't know, so AI is more like the software, blockchain is more like the storage, like where that information is going to be stored. It's an infrastructure of storage, if just to bring it down. And then we bring quantum computing in, which is the hardware. And oh my gosh, when you have blockchain AI and quantum computing converge, the world will not look the same.
Absolutely.
So let's talk, just with the couple minutes we have left here, what do you think as an attorney, how do you think the future is going to look in the next 12 to 18 months?
It's hard to say.
And how you do business?
It's hard to say because things are changing so much in just the matter of 3 months. As you surely know, everybody seems to know, especially with AI and quantum computing. But I mean, blockchain has been around for a while, ever since, Bitcoin's been released to the world. I've always been a proponent of blockchain. Like as you said, there's some kinks to work out. I'm sure the programmers, there's a reason why they're so much more expensive than other developers. It's difficult technology to work with, but if you keep it in simple terms, it could be so useful to have distributed, transparent information that will prevent fraud and can be used for so many purposes, especially for real estate. I think in the near future, and I don't want to scare attorneys who maybe have been working for 30 years and are very scared by all these terms and digital assets and blockchain and smart contracts. Quantum computing scares me too, so we're all on the same boat there because it is complex. But I think you were asking me earlier, and I think any attorney who knows what they're doing, the first conversation should be, especially when creating a business, what happens if you die? What happens if you go bankrupt? Those are the first conversations I have with my clients, and that's why I'm so fascinated by the work you're doing. And any attorney who does anything with estate plans or even has an idea that something can be related to estate plans should be talking about digital assets because we were discussing earlier, there's so many digital assets that people are going to own and they don't even know they're going to own. It's not, you're not going to go purchase a digital asset voluntarily anymore. It's just things that are you're going to own without realizing was even a possibility for you, whether it's tokens or crypto in your 401k or different forms of digital assets. And you need to plan for these things because if you were to die, they're treated a lot differently than the normal real day assets, right? You need to have a plan for how a
You
wallet
need to have a
a wallet
plan.
distributes the private key or the private keys in order to transfer a wallet. You need to have plans for everything in your business and your state plan. And so I think professionals like myself are going to hopefully start catching people's attention, and that's how the world's going to look. The people who are going to do very well are the ones that plan, and the generational wealth is going to be created by those who plan. I work a lot with 1031 exchanges, and I incorporate that into estate plans. 1031 exchanges are where you can sell real estate or real estate portfolios and basically defer the capital gains. So I have clients who maybe made $3 million off a property. And now when they go to sell it, they need to pay $1 million. But with a 1031, they can reinvest that money and basically defer the capital gains. When you die, you have a step up in basis, which eliminates all the taxes. So when I learned all this, I was like, okay, that's how people are rich and for generations to come. And that's someone who really understands these things and plans for them. Those are the ones who are going to do very well. The future is very exciting. It's a very great time to be alive. We could all die at any given time, so we need to plan for that. But I see the next couple months and year being one in where crypto is going to flourish. People are going to start owning digital assets they had no idea they would ever encounter in very short amount of time. And there's many other, projections I can make, but I think those are the most important ones.
And this was an amazing conversation. I mean, again, for some people, hopefully your head's not spinning too much, but this is, we're dripping into the technology and we have entered the fourth industrial revolution. And this is the world that we're living in. If you miss your flip phone, the next phase might make your head spin. And it's a decision. Some people don't need to step into this digital world that that we are being catapulted into. But if you are, please, take extra care, extra precaution, understand where your assets are and how to best protect them. If there's one piece of advice you can give to our listeners, something that they can do today or tomorrow, what would that be?
It's a great question. Um, Learn about digital assets. Learn about the mechanics that we discussed today. Anything that jumped out at you, whether it's a smart contract or the blockchain, and how you can utilize the things you're already doing in the real world. Everything is going to be digitalized, whether you want it to be or not. So the more you learn, the more you incorporate AI or digital assets into whatever you're doing and plan, the better you and your business and your family are going to be in the long run.
And then if people want to get connected to you and learn more about your business, where can they find you, Franco?
Absolutely. Torre Law is the name of my firm. So whether it's on LinkedIn or social media or Substack, if you like to read, I write about all these matters we've been discussing and find it quite fascinating. So it's honestly been a pleasure to be able to speak to you about it today.
Well, and thank you so much. Thank you for talking to me about digital assets. And we'll end our call here. Appreciate your time.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. I hope this conversation inspired you to take control and plan for the inevitable to protect yourself and those you leave behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at digitallegacypodcast.com. Remember, life is full of surprises. What happens after you die shouldn't be. So keep your passwords safe and your playbook up to date.